Awesome. We are live. All right. Let me see if I can share out my link and we'll get started. Hoping that my sound check is going all right. So I hope everybody's having an amazing new year. So I posted yesterday about my 2019 goals. And so anybody on, let me know what your goals are for 2019 and what you're trying to do. Then also let me know, last time it seemed like for some reason the mic was cutting out. So I don't know if it was my connection or what was going on. So if my sound is good, can somebody just give me a thumbs up and say, hey, it's not coming in choppy? And while we do that, I'm going to cut off this little heater I've got. So I wanted to take one of the first questions. Oh, awesome. Awesome to know. I wanted to take one of the first questions that I had on yesterday's video was around what are the books that I read. So I was talking at the end, if you stuck around and listened to it, I was talking about, you know, what my personal kind of goals were for 2019. And so I did want to, I'm on Goodread. I don't know if it's public or not. And I'll go through some of the books now. Some of these are going to be data engineering focused and some aren't, but some of the first ones that I read. So I think everybody kind of knows, I talked about this in my books, but the Learning Tensorflow was one of the books that I read in 2019. And I said I got 22, but I went back in Goodreads and I guess I didn't update some of them, but I did a pretty good mix. I still did a lot of, I went through the Red Rising series. So I've only did the 3 books. So I recommend that for a good, you know, it's just a fun read. But that's kind of what I did. And I did start with why, and I did reviews on some of these before too. Do the work, anything Stephen Pressfield. This is more, I don't want to call it self-help because I think that kind of, there's a stigma sometimes with that, but it's just about, hey, how do you kind of walk through and do the things that you want? Yes, I see you. Awesome. Thanks. Give me a thumbs up. What do you think about the sound? We're doing good on sound. That was one of the complaints from last video. Another book that I read in 2018. It's hard to remember that, right? Trusted Advisor. So I went through and reviewed a couple of these, and then this one really not even business related. I'm into fitness to some extent, and I'm trying to figure out how to eat a little bit better. So those are some of the books that I read. Some of the ones that I've got coming up this year. I got some good ideas around some more neural network kind of books and some more, I don't want to say data science, but you know, more machine learning. So awesome. So you know, that's kind of been my focus, and I think you've seen that a little bit on this channel. And that's, you know, that's one of the things that I did want to kind of put out there is, you know, what are some of the videos and what are some of the things that you want to see? Do you want to see more of the deep learning? And some of the reasons that I'm going down this deep learning path and just kind of learning is I think it's good balance. I get a lot of questions around it, but I also see where kind of the market's going and where, you know, where things are trying to shift. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take, you know, a data engineer's approach. So somebody that's been in the Hadoop ecosystem for a while and kind of see what's different about the deep learning and kind of where that meshes together. And there are a lot of projects that are coming out that are trying to blend both those worlds, right? So we've talked about Project Hydrogen. There's another one called Rapids that's by NVIDIA. And it's about being able to take that, you know, semi-structured data or, you know, traditional data that you have sitting in the Hadoop ecosystem and being able to kind of bridge that gap and, you know, pretty much use GPUs, right? So like if you can use GPUs to speed up your ETL processing, then man, you get to do a lot more than sit there and be like, well, waiting on that, you know, waiting on your job to finish. So really, really cool stuff going on from that perspective. And then another big thing for 2019 that I was talking about, if you've watched that video, if you haven't, I would encourage you to go and look at it. I'd say the first 70% of the video is, you know, just about the goals that I have from a data engineering perspective for 2019, and they all center around certification. So this is going to be the year for me for certifications. Some of that certifications are built off of what you as the audience have kind of asked, right? There's been a lot of questions around what's going on, you know, from a certifications perspective with Hortonworks and Cloudera. A lot of questions around some of the Cloudera certifications. I've reached out to some of my partners at Pluralsight to see, what some of the courses are, and I've got some answers coming around, some around the Spark. So I think I'm going to jump in and get the data, toward the middle half of the year, the way it's going to work out. I should be sitting for the Cloudera Data Engineering certification, and maybe even the I think it's the CC 175 that I've gotten so many questions about that's specific around Spark. So those are my goals. Is it worth it on the Cloudera certification? I think it is. I think it's going to depend on where you're going. But now, well, let me take that back. I used to say it depends, right? Like if you were applying for a job or your company was using Hortonworks, then it's not going to hurt you to get a Cloudera certification. But if you don't have a Hortonworks certification, you might want to get that. But now, kind of, with the companies coming together and being a merger, I think it is worth it. Now, I will say, it depends on the fact that if you're going into a company and they're not really certified and they're not really standardized on the Cloudera stack, then you might want to prioritize getting an AWS big data certification or GCP or Azure's big data area, if those are what they're using, or some of the other things. It's not going to hurt you, but like I said, if you're having a conversation with my daughter earlier this morning about triage, and we were just talking about cleaning some stuff up, but it's the same thing here, right? Like, what's the most important thing? So if you're sitting there and your certification stack or the company that you're applying for or where you're at is using Hortonworks, then you're going to want to focus on those. Nobody's going to say don't get these other ones, right? Especially if you're looking through to see, okay, in 1 to 2 years, where are we going to be at? One of the reasons I'm so curious about the Cloudera certifications is I'm just, with the merger and some of the things going and so many questions that I've had here, I want to walk through that. And honestly, like last year, I released 2 videos around or 2 courses for Pluralsight around Hortonworks and following through that certification. And so now I want to kind of pivot, and I'm a little bit weaker in Cloudera. So I think that's a good opportunity for me to take a learning approach. So a long answer to your question is it depends, but it doesn't depend as much. And specifically, I think I had a question come in around, okay, if you're in your 3rd year of college, in your undergrad, is it worth getting a Cloudera certification in your 3rd year? So if you're a junior, I'm assuming is it? I think it's worth it. Anytime you can get something. When I was going through school, like I took an opportunity to get any certification I could, and like something as simple as like this is quite a while ago, but this was something as simple as like I had an Access class. So I'm thinking Microsoft Access. I know it's still around, but it's just, it was somewhat popular then, but it's even less popular now. But I had an Access class, and the teacher had an incentive where, you didn't have to, you didn't have to take the final, and you got like 100 if you got your certification. So I went in, paid the $95 or $100, whatever it was, to sit for the certification, because she gave us, even if we attempted it, like a 90 or something like that. And so I just sat for it, ended up getting the certification. And that's just another opportunity, one, to learn how these certification tests go, because it's great to study for it. It's great to go through the simulations, go through test questions. But then when you actually sit for the test, it's like, whoa, it's a little more stressful, even in a scenario where like it was a win-win for me, even if I didn't pass it. So I think being able to sit for those in your 3rd year is going to benefit you. Make sure though, as you're going through the prerequisites, make sure you're doing some training. Whether it be some kind of paid training through Pluralsight or just finding some things on the web, but make sure you're going through those prerequisites. So, because a lot of them are going to ask and say, especially, depending on which one you're doing for Cloudera, it's going to ask for you to have at least 6 months to a year experience. It's going to recommend that, right? But you don't have to have that, but just know that you might have to study a little bit more, right? Like some of the terminology, some of the other things for somebody that's been doing this for a couple of years, it's going to be a little bit easier for them. So just know that going in, but you have advantages too, where, maybe you've got more time to study. Maybe, maybe you've got, better resources and other things. So look at those prerequisites and, see if you sit for them, and, find some of the training for it too. So, Any other questions, or has anybody that's recently joined, what are your goals for 2019? What are you looking to accomplish, from a data engineering perspective, or I mean, even from a life perspective around that. So yeah, so comment here coming in. So like the answer, we're looking for the Cloudera certification, but starting to see a more Scala shortage in France. So wow, that's pretty interesting. I hadn't seen that or heard that. I know. I'll be honest. I've been heads down, kind of focused on Python and just kind of shoring up. And I probably spent I don't know, the better half of at least the last quarter of last year, but maybe even the last 6 months of really digging into TensorFlow and seeing what's going on there. Looked a little bit at PyTorch too. Maybe that'll be something I add in. But with that being said, like one of the things that I noticed is like, man, Python is everywhere, and it's not that Python's new, right? But it's just like it seems to have taken off, and there's so many different APIs. And even talking about Scala, there are they using Scala for Spark in that particular instance, or that's kind of interesting to me, because my thinking was, after going through, so I built a course. It's I don't know when it'll be released just yet, but it should be going out here soon. I did a course recently that should be coming out for Pluralsight around TensorFlow, and I did it all from a Python perspective, using actually one of the higher level APIs called TF-Learn. So my thought process was, I'm going to go back and look at some more Spark and maybe do some more. I don't know. I've got some other courses that I'm going to do, but I may do some more tutorials on here around Python, Spark, and just kind of showing that, because there's some really interesting things that are coming with Spark, as far as being able to leverage and being able to pull in TensorFlow workflows or PyTorch workflows. So yes, so you were saying it was in Spark. So it's interesting. I can see where they standardize in some areas, but I'd be curious to see if Python is not making its way there too. So like I said, I could be just in my own box, from this point, just thinking, everything I've seen, and maybe I'm just looking for it to be Python, but it's interesting to me of how popular that is. But you're saying that, there's a big need for Scala in France too. So that's pretty cool. Do I think it's possible to work as a data engineer remotely? Sure. I think it's possible. I think it's gonna depend on the company, and kind of what your role is. Especially, you'll see a lot. Well, I mean, you maybe this was the case a couple years ago, but I know one of the first things that kind of went remote, that was a little bit easier to have remote employees. When I used to work for a huge one of the largest IT tech kind of consulting companies, I think on the planet at the time. But one of the first things that we started to see internally, and even with contract work. So think of internally like supporting our systems, right? And then think of contract work, which I was customer facing. One of the first roles we would see that would be the administrator, right? So when you've heard me talk before about data engineers, and specifically around Hadoop developers, and so you have your developer, and then you have your administrator. So one of the first roles you start to see is that administrator. But I would say I think it's changed a little bit more. So when I first saw that question, I was like, maybe it's going to be more for the administrator. The developer, that's going to be a little bit, I won't say harder, but you're really going to have to pay attention to the culture of the company you're working for, or even if it's a contract role, where your role. So my whole thought process around that is just think of agile development, some of the other pieces that when we're talking about a developer. So specify to me, like, are you looking for an administrator role, or are you looking more for a developer, as in like, hey, I want to be writing Spark jobs, or maybe even some MapReduce jobs, or Scala, Scala Spark jobs, or Flink, or if you specify here in the comments, I'll elaborate a little bit more on how I think you can approach that. Is the Hortonworks certification getting started? So I'm not sure what you're asking about the Hortonworks certification. I know. So at the end of last year, man, I think even starting in September or October, you have to fact check me on that. But they did hold some of the Hortonworks certifications. But I did build 2 courses around that specific certification from the administrator's perspective. So I've got 2 courses in Pluralsight. Let me see if I've actually got a link for it here too. So I'll just put it in the comment section here. for everyone, but I did 2 courses last year that were specific to Hortonworks. It should really be easier for me to click and paste and talk at the same time, but it's not. So there's a link to my author page, but I did 2 courses specifically around the Hortonworks certification. And so the first one is called Getting Started with Hortonworks Data Platform. And so that takes you through setting up Hortonworks Data Platform and kind of going through it. Now, I touched on it a little bit in my other courses, like the Getting Started with HDFS. So that gives you the command line approach to being able to do everything from HDFS, so how to navigate HDFS, but also like Pig and HBase, Hive, and how to do things from the command line there. But in that Getting Started course, that takes you through all the base level. And then the enterprise skills is a secondary follow-up to it. So if you're going to sit for that certification, I would go through both of those 2 courses. So I built those. Obviously, those are Pluralsight. I'm very biased to Pluralsight. I was before, if you've ever heard my story, I was a Pluralsight subscriber before I became an author. I just became an author through going through my big data journey and just kind of asking for some courses. So specifically to ETL, so ETL in Spark. So back to my comment. I don't know if you were on when I first started talking about it, like my journey, and like I spent 2018 kind of going through and learning more about TensorFlow and GPUs and some of the other things. One of the big things that I was talking about when we talk about being able to marry that world from the big data ecosystem, thinking of like Hadoop and Spark and those ecosystem components, and what's going on with deep learning, with TensorFlow and everything. The really big bridge to it is, one, they want to be able to access those libraries, right? You want to be able to pull in TensorFlow or PyTorch or whatever the next big deep learning library is going to be. Secondary to that is to use Spark and use the GPUs that are traditionally used in deep learning to be able to speed up that ETL process too. So, if you're looking through and looking forward to like, hey, what's going to be some of the next opportunities for me, and how can I make myself, more marketable, or even not even that, like maybe you just want to know what some of the cutting edge things are and how people are solving problems faster. I would start to look at, if you're already in the Spark world, what are they doing from a GPU perspective, especially around ETL, because that's really the focus. And like you can see with NVIDIA, what they're doing with Rapids is the ability to cut that time down too. So there's a ton of resources out there. Do I agree that Kubernetes and Docker are more suitable for machine learning workloads than Hadoop and Yarn? I'm going to say yes, but I'm going to clarify a little bit more. I think I see it more often. So in the deep learning space, and so when I think about like what's going on with TensorFlow and PyTorch and like DGL4J, a lot of those opportunities, and I'll be honest, most of when I talk to people who are doing deep learning, they are doing like Kubernetes and Docker, and it's predominantly all TensorFlow. So I have talked to some people that are looking to PyTorch, and they're looking out in the future that, hey, we're going to start doing that, but they all want to do it. You're right, from a Docker and a Kubernetes perspective too. And if you remember, I did I don't know if it's last year or year before last, but when I think it was last year, when Hadoop 3.0 released, I did a video on that, and one of kind of the teasers of where I was looking at is, if you look at how much of the Docker and more containerization that they were allotting into Yarn, is you can see like where Hortonworks and Cloudera, we're all kind of seeing that going forward too. And I mean, within the last month, I might have it here, there's actually an article that Cloudera released. Let me see if I got it here. I think there was an article that Cloudera released around Kubernetes. Let me see if I've got that real quick that I can pull up. I think this might be it. Yep. So check out this article too. Like the longest link ever. Sorry. So, but you can see where they released, it was December 5th. Just their ability to go more cloud native. And so when you think cloud native, think, Docker. And for people that aren't in that world. And I've been on a Docker journey the last year, once again, because I kind of started looking at the TensorFlow and that portion. Cloud native, think Docker Kubernetes, kind of what's going on there. So I guess I agreed with you. I guess I agreed with you, and I gave you another article to show where even outside of just deep learning, where you are seeing a Docker and Kubernetes and a cloud native approach, even for our traditional workloads. So after the merger of Cloudera and Hortonworks certification got freeze. I don't know. I haven't checked on that freeze. I would look back to it. I want to say the first of the year. So there's an announcement, and actually there's a public live event that Cloudera and Hortonworks are gonna do here in the next couple of weeks. So you should see some movement on there, because they're going to support. I mean, this is all public knowledge, right? They've sent out emails. I don't know if you're on any of the emails from Hortonworks, but I'd sign up for them, especially if you're involved in their community. Like it seems like, but they're supporting both HTTP and CDH all the way till I forget which versions, but the newest versions are going to support those up until I think 2021, 2022. I just checked those out, so those are guaranteed. So those certifications still should sit. And if you look at certifications just outside of that too, generally there's a time frame on them, right? Like you have to refresh them every maybe 3 years, sometimes 2, just depending on where they're at. So whether that be with AWS or Azure, or even like the CompTIA, like some of the security ones that are kind of outside of what we normally talk about. There's a general refresh on those anyway. So if you're standardized on HTTP, there's not going to be a reason for you, not to get that certification and continue on the path that you're on. And just knowing, hey, when it's about time for me to refresh my my certification, I'm going to have to learn some new pieces, right? And same thing for people on the CDH side too. So hope that answered your question. Maybe out of topic, but do you have any idea for the daily rate for data engineers? I do not. I don't know that from the perspective of a contract role. I'm assuming that's what you're asking, but you can find that information on out there. I know I looked at it, some of the numbers from 2019, and I know machine learning and data engineer were some of the top rated individual contributors. So think non-management. So think of individual contributor, like this is what you bring to the table. Data engineer was in the top, specifically for IT, for all of 2018. I would assume that would continue on 2019, except maybe, and I've talked about this, there's kind of, I won't say a shift, but there's a new role that's kind of there with your data engineer called the machine learning engineer, where they kind of bridge the gap for some of the things that we're seeing with machine learning, and then also Kubernetes and Docker. So I keep going back to that cloud native. That's such a good question, because it's funny that you mentioned that. I've been thinking about that all this week, and I've got some videos that I'm going to release around, we talk about Hadoop and Yarn and all those other pieces, and those are super important pieces too. But one of the things I haven't talked about on this channel for data engineers is, hey, there's opportunities there to really be an expert with Kubernetes and Docker and some of the cloud native things that are going on. So can I evolve into a data engineer from being a database administrator? Man, 100%. So you've got some of the skills, right? So you've got some of the skills with SQL, which is another one that I don't really talk about much, and it's still out there, right? SQL's still big. SQL is actually, so I had a background, I was a web developer, but I had a background with SQL, and I had a little bit of Linux, right? So I had a little bit of experience, with Linux. And so I was able to jump in and kind of dive in, and having that database administrator really gives you. I think I did a video on this one too, but having that database administrator gives you a good baseline for being around kind of what's going on from a SQL perspective, but then also being able to use some tools. So I were a database administrator looking to jump in, and it's going to depend on what role you want to go. If you want to go more the administrator, or if you want to go more the developer. You've really got an opportunity there with like some of the tools, like Hive, for instance, right? Where Hive is kind of becoming that enterprise data warehouse in a distributed fashion. And so a lot of the tutorials and a lot of the things that are out there, and so any courses that I've taught around Hive and sections that I've talked about Hive, you can definitely see where with that you can take. Here we go. So with that, you can take and you can start to be able to use those skills. So take what's going on with Hive, and that'll give you a good baseline for how to be able to take in. I'm sorry, I'm lost in thought because I was once again I still can't click and and talk live. I'll figure it out someday. But so you'll be able to take those skills because like what you're doing in Hive is similar to probably a lot of the things that you're doing from a DBA perspective on a different scale, right? You still got to learn the terminology and all the things that are different about running, in a Hadoop and in a distributed environment. But I look like Gerard Butler. I don't. Is that good? I hope so. Like he was from 300, right? Yeah. Like 2019 goals to start working out so I can look better like Gerard. I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, but oh man, this question here. So Teradata's future, huh? Man, I've kind of talked a little bit. Well, not a little bit. I've talked a good bit around especially when we were like a couple years ago when it was really hot and like Hadoop was kind of where AI is as far as a hype cycle. And I say hype cycle just as meaning it gets media attention. So just because Hadoop's out of the hype cycle doesn't mean that Hadoop's going away or that ecosystem, right? And just because AI is in the hype cycle doesn't mean it's just hype, but it's just so much gets talked about, right? Like anybody that writes an article for Inc. or Forbes or any of the major areas, if they put a component in it that has it, so there's a lot of talk about it. So all that caveating, I'm going to roll this Teradata question into more of the enterprise data warehouse question, right? So my thought process around that, like that is a huge market that has been a huge market for a long time. It's not going away, but where Hadoop and where distributed and kind of all the things that we talk about from a innovative next generation kind of architecture applications. So Hadoop or deep learning or those pieces, it is eroding away the growth that those traditionally had. So when you think of enterprise data warehouse, right? So, but you see the vendors, the major vendors, they have the ability to bring those in, right? Like Teradata has a distributed Hadoop, solution. Oracle has BDA. Their enterprise data warehouse that has a Hadoop. I say traditional, but they have a Hadoop offering and solution there. So I would say from a traditional enterprise data warehouse, it's not going anywhere, but the growth has slowed down on it. And I feel like that Hadoop and that ecosystem is taking some of that growth away. So they are having to incorporate, right? So, it's open source, it was out there, people see how it was going. They're incorporating those tools into their workflows to be able to, compete and be able to give customers and, users what they're looking for in those environments. So, um, long long answer to say, I mean, I don't know where their future as a company. So like I said, I'm just commenting on the enterprise data warehouse in general and kind of where that's going. So that's kind of my thought process. I hope I answered your question on that one. So so I want to jump to a couple more questions, and then one thing I'm really interested in is if anybody's new that has joined on, what are you looking for in 2019? Does anybody have any goals that they want to share? Like I said, mine are around certifications. Like I'm going through the deep learning certification right now through Coursera, taught by Andrew Ning. Really cool course, just helping me as a data, being able to take that data engineering approach and see what's going on in deep learning. I think that's going to be huge for man, anybody that's watching this video, it could be a huge opportunity. But then also just kind of seeing where the market, where the market's going. Like what are they doing in deep learning that we weren't doing, in Hadoop, and what are we gonna what are we doing to bridge those gaps? So that's the first one. I'm getting back. I got to go back and really ramp down on some Splunk. So I've been I've been wanting to knock out a couple Splunk certifications, and so I'm really going to go heads down. There's some really cool stuff that I've seen coming out of there. So a lot of the people, I don't know if everybody's familiar, but I'm part of a podcast and do some blogging with the Big Data Beard team. And so there's a lot of there's a lot of really smart people on that team, and there's quite a few individuals that have a lot of information, a lot of experience in the Splunk ecosystem. And so for me, I want to kind of dig back into that. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time going through and getting back involved with that. Especially, they have some newer versions since I did, and I've got it listed here, but I've got a Pluralsight course out there that I did. So I'm interested to see what the changes have been since that. So I've been following that community. So I'm going to knock out those 3 certifications. Then I'm going to jump through the Cloudera Data Engineer, some of the other ones, and then I might jump in and I've got my AWS Architect Associate certification. And so that they've lifted it used to be where you had to have one of those before you could sit for like the big data specialty certification. So I think I'm going to go back and try to get that big data specialty certification. So all that being said, I think they've lifted the ban again. So like you can just sit for it. But so me having the AWS associate architect, but I didn't really have a background in it. So I thought it'd be good to get that certification. And then I might, depending on how the year rolls, I might try to look at some kind of cloud native certification. So I'm not sure what all is out there and available for that. So it's kind of like a stretch goal for certification, but that's kind of my thought process. So I think if there's not any other questions, I think we can go back on our Saturday. If anybody's watching this at a different time, let me know if there's a better time for us to go live. So that's another thing that I want to make sure we're doing in 2019 is I want to make sure to make sure that we're putting together a good time. Oh, another question. I gotta take this one because I see it's about Databricks. So around the Databricks certification, man, it's funny you mentioned that. Somebody actually reached out to me on LinkedIn. They were asking about some of the certifications they would get, and there was around Spark. And so I did point them to, like we were talking about with the Cloudera certification earlier. I did point to them and say, hey, there's an opportunity there. I haven't fully gone into what all Databricks offers, but I think they do have some courses and some certifications there. And so that would be a good opportunity to take more of a agnostic certification around Spark. And so that could kind of go, which not that the Cloudera one or the AWS portions aren't going to be aren't going to be the same, but if you had just the Spark certification, then whether you're doing it in Cloudera or Hortonworks or AWS or Azure, that just kind of gives you that full view. So that's pretty cool. So is that what you're going after, that certification in 2019? And then since I'm asking you questions, but I appreciate. So you're going after that in 2019. Do you have some of the other certifications as well? So just kind of interesting to hear everybody else's ideas for what they're doing in 2019. And just to be clear, like anybody, if you're looking at this and like, oh man, I hadn't gotten them together, like the start of the year is just an arbitrary time to start. Like you can start something anytime you want. So like the goals and the things that I have planned for 2019, like they might change, right? But I know, I know that's kind of the guidelines and the path that I want to go down. But there's nothing to say that, hey, if something different comes up, I don't change directions, mid year. Be like, hey, I got some of these certifications, but I'd really like to add maybe this Databricks one or something else. So don't feel bad if you haven't started your goals, and you can start your goals anywhere. It's like when you're talking about health, like one of the big things that people always say, man, I'm gonna start my diet on Monday or whatever. Like you don't have to wait till Monday, right? Or Sunday. You don't have to wait. You can decide anytime you want. And it could be one of those things where, like, say that you were gonna say, I'm gonna eat a little bit better and not eat much pizza. And you could have just ate pizza an hour ago. You can start right then, right? It doesn't have to be like, well, I'm going to wait till this other time. So same thing with what we're doing here with our certifications and with our goals and just our education knowledge for 2019. So no more questions. I'm going to give everybody back some time. Oh, wait. So you're planning on AWS Solutions Architect and AWS Big Data ML certification. So cool. I will say, for me, from my perspective, the AWS Solutions Architect it was really tough for me. I did not have at that time a background in AWS for sure. I'd done some stuff in Azure, and pretty much most of everything that I've done, has been on prem. So just some of the projects and some of the requirements around what I worked with. When I first started in the Hadoop community, I was heavy on Hortonworks and had some experience with Cloudera, but everything was on prem just because of. I mean, you can find out. You can look on my LinkedIn profile and probably guess why. But we just the way the customer environments, and from a security perspective, we just had to be able to do that. So that was my perspective. If you have a background in it, man, it'll probably be a lot easier for you. But I will say, for me, it was a hard certification, and like it was one I was super proud to have gotten. So like as soon as I got it, I called my boss and I was like, "Hey man, you're not gonna believe this." So all right, I'm gonna give everybody back some time in 20 in on Saturday. So anybody that has any suggestions for better times for these live sessions, I'd love to incorporate one maybe through the week, like in the evening. So just let me know what time. But yeah, so yeah, okay. So sorry your internet connection died. You meant in general. Let me look back. Yes, in general. So I think back to your question. So the question that we're referring to was remote options for data engineers, and you're saying in general. I think you back to the statement where I was originally saying like, hey, look at it from an administrator or developer perspective. In my view, and it's changed over time, I'm sure, but in my view, it was easier from an administrator perspective. So to get those roles, but I have been on scrum teams and remote teams where we were all developers and didn't have to go into an office, right? We did our daily stand-ups from from our desk, and nobody stood up. But, I mean, I'm pretty sure, right? We didn't do video conference. So you just have to know the culture of the team. I would say the culture is going to depend more just from the nature of it. It's going to depend more if on the developer side, but in general from an administrator perspective, right? So if you're the Hadoop administrator, I think it's going to be a whole lot easier to find those roles, but still it's going to depend on the company too. Hey, what's up, man? It's a lot of high bros. So hey, so what's your what's your goals for 2019? Not sure. All right. So any more questions or anything like that? Let me know. Throw them in the comment section here below. And then, as always, have a great weekend. Make sure you get a little bit of learning done, maybe just 30 minutes or so. And let me know if there's anything that I can help with. And congratulations for starting off 2019 awesome.